Hello again. If you're hearing this voice, that means I'm still Kirk. This is still Dumb Tessellate, the story creative podcast, as you follow along with me in the story creation process. This podcast is part storytelling, part me rambling, and part me trying to piece together my thoughts and create a cohesive story, which always doesn't always happen, but I make a good attempt at it. And I remember to sometimes record a podcast about it. But thanks for listening. If you've been following along in order of podcast releases, thank you. I do like to confuse people. So if you're following along with me, thanks. Might help a little, but not a lot. Now time for some interactive fun. The story I've been currently working on is the Pages of the Pentacle. It's kind of a story that's basically told in three parts with a writer. That's basically me, my character. That's telling this story called The Cursed Detective. They've been this long time creator of this story called The Cursed Detective. That they've been struggling with keeping going. They're like this indie artist that's, struggling artist to creating this story. But it's long running. It's basically their meal ticket, and it hasn't been paying that much. And there's this role-playing fandom group that takes this story, the Cursed Detective story, way too seriously. And at one point, the writer decides that he wants to end the story, and it doesn't go well for him as the Pages group. That's like this online fandom group basically take that as a insult to them because they've based so much of their fan fiction and their life around the role playing of this Cursed Detective story. They feel like they own it, and trouble ensues. That's the basic thing of the story. It's a story told in threes, where there's the real life story of the Pages group, this role playing group that becomes basically the antagonist. The writer, I guess, is the protagonist. And the Cursed Detective story, that's like the fictionalized story in that universe that's going on at the same time. And the story is kind of told in threes with similar concepts binding them all together. Like the last one I was talking about, the similar concept was called anxiety, where my character, the main character, the writer, is struggling with making this announcement, basically killing off his darling, and the anxiety of the Pages group, the role-playing group, and the anxiety from the Cursed Detective in the fictional story. That's the story creative I've been working on. I've been still trying to build it out. I do have what I've done with past stories is taking like a real life true crime, because like I've talked about before, this comes from me being a bored office worker who listens to true crime all day while he's, working on reports. So I take a lot of real life inspiration and turn it into like fictional stories. I do have in the last episode I did for this, I came up kind of with the archetypes of and the build out characters for the Cursed Detective. I named him Aska Strickland, and kind of his background and his trajectory to become the Cursed Detective. Next up, I kind of have a good archetype for the villain in their group. It's based off a real true life story that like I never knew the conspiracy theories behind it, but I'll get to that in a second. First, I want to talk about like one of the main things that kind of drives me to do this podcast and be creative, the story creative process. I love hearing, I'll just say podcast is the easy out, a podcast about the creation process, about whatever it may be, writers, creators, artists, filmmakers, musicians, everything. I love hearing about that creative process. That's what really inspires me. And that's what kind of put me in this mindset to want to participate in a podcast like this, where it's not just storytelling, it's the story creative process. And one of the things I recently heard, of course, from a podcast was this concept of the Avant-Guarde Gambit. It's from this historian, this writer, this great, I think she's an artist too. Her name is Griselda Pollock from the UK, Leeds. It was a podcast. It was about the Leeds 13. It was like this great art, not art exhibit, but art concept. It was like a real life art piece. Let's just say that. That happened in the early 90s. It was called the Leeds 13. Look that up. It was amazing. But she was instrumental in it because it came from art students that were going to the University of Leeds, where she was a professor, and she was leading kind of this art group. And one of their projects was to do this, big piece. And one of her teachings is she's written many books. I'm trying to find a copy of like the lectures that this came from, the Avant-Guarde Gambit, and it basically is broken down into three things. I know there's much more depth to this, but this is the most basic concept I got from it. The breakdown of it is reference, deference, and difference. It's like if you want to become an artist or a historian or learn more about the way the creative process goes, you have to look at it past artists, past masters with reference, deference, and difference. You have to look at, or when you're creating from learning from the masters, I should say, it's like that art concept that I love that I'm probably stealing from so many times. You watch the way something is created. You try to create it yourself, replicating the masters. Then you learn, it's like you learn the strokes of how a painting is done from a master, but then you're picking up something like that and you basically do it your own way. You understand it. You see what you're creating, the difference of it, and then the importance of it. I guess that's the difference. The difference is your creation. So whatever you create doesn't have to be everything, but like a major piece, it's like that's your graduation as an artist. You reference a great piece, you reference the master, you show the deference that you understood the meaning behind the piece, and you show the difference. Your piece is different, but it shows that reference and deference. And that's a great concept. And I'm trying to find a book. There's from Griselda Pollock, who created this Avant-Guarde Gambit, on thrift books, but it got expensive. It's one of those things where you're looking at it and it's like, it's basically a lecture. I wonder if I can find it online, but I'll still keep looking. It's basically one of the things when you see it at a certain price, you're like, oh, let me just put it in my cart. I did that. It was like 10 something. I should have bought it $10 or $12. Now it's like 30 something dollars. It's like a one-off collection of the lectures that this is based around. I guess she first put it out there, but this is part of her lecture series or something. She's a professor and art historian. She's written many books. I really want to go in a deep dive into her, because she deals a lot with like feminism and the art world and all that stuff, which is always interesting to me, just going down that creative process also. But that's the big thing I want to do. Just like before, when I was reading Save the Cat as kind of the inspiration and the guide for me to creating these stories, because it was all going along the guise of, I had an idea from some kind of reference and I was going to create a movie. So I had to write a script. And I was reading through that book, the script writing process called Save the Cat, which is I also reference that. I still keep it in my mind. But this is something new that I can add to, my creative process, because that's basically the main thing of what this podcast is. That's why I fully went on and said, even though it's called Dumb Test Late, the tagline is the Story Creative Podcast. So using reference, deference, and difference. So for this current story I'm working on, the Pages of the Pentacle, this is my first reference. This is like another exercise I do when I'm at lunch. I take out my old laptop that's not connected to the internet. I just throw all my thoughts down and from the inspiration I got. So I'm going to read it word for word for what I wrote, and just, the word spaghetti, throw it all out there and see if it makes sense. Okay, this is what I wrote for reference. This is what I have so far. Okay, the original reference for the creation of this story comes from real life criminal activity that arose from the fan-made role-playing forums of the Vampire series by Anne Rice, the Vampire Anne Rice novels. Well, I never read those novels or even watched the interview with the Vampire movie. The immersion of the new reality that was created and cultivated by the role-playing fandom group is the main reference that drove me to create this story. From outside perspective, it is easy to question how a role-playing fandom group could be so deep into the fiction of a vampire story to create their own accepted reality that was portrayed within the forums that led to real life consequences. How could they let their own reality become so intertwined with fiction? But I use my own experiences with thinking feelings and emotions were real with someone, especially that they were the same kind of feelings, but I was really wrong about. It led to me feeling hurt, heartbroken, and betrayed. But the reality of it was that they didn't have nowhere near the same level of emotion and feelings towards me. So, for this example, my reality of having genuine feelings for someone were so one-sided, they became my accepted reality. And it was only my reality, as on the other side of the quote-unquote relationship didn't have the same views as me. similar to the fan group that I'm creating in the pages, have done something similar, and they have created this own reality for themselves, related not to the character, not to only the character of the cursed detective Aska Strickland, but the writer, since this one-sided reality is a warm place, or better, since they were in a way escaping from a sadder, more depressing reality. What they created with their small, dedicated fan group was real to them, and the writer taking that away from them felt like the ultimate betrayal, even though the writer didn't know the full extent of how they depended on him for their acceptance and happiness. Also, this is what I assume the false sense of reality is what takes place with the main character, Annie Wilkes, in Misery, which was another inspiration for this story. Since she is in love with the fictional character Misery Chastain from the story series, as she takes the author captive in his car after his car crash from the story, the Stephen King story Misery, which I borrowed from Libby, the library Kindle version. It's like your public library, but you can borrow Kindle versions of stories. You only get 2 weeks. I'm such a slow reader. I'm trying to get through it. Essentially, back to reading. Essentially, it does what start again. Essentially, it does touch on what love means to someone, but through the version of their own reality that they have created and feel is real to them. For the Pages fandom group, who are at a young and impressionable age, the Cursed Detective series has felt so real to them, as it started as just entertainment escapism, but after a while it became to feel so real to them, as they found their sense of purpose and community with creating and maintaining this small fandom role-playing group. It leads to them having the false sense of ownership over the fictional story itself and the writer, since they have supported him since the very beginning, and since he still is a small, relatively independent writer-creator. Even though they may have never met him in person or talked to him, they feel they know him and have the obsessive notion that he is writing exclusively to them, and that he has talked his this, especially from the writer in the story, talked about his issues with personal and mental health through interviews. That's what I wrote about reference. I want to write more about deference and difference as far as creating this story. Of course, deference, you show how you understand the concept of the stories that you're being inspired by, like mine are Misery and, the Maltese Falcon. As far as the Cursed Detective goes, I need to really get through those and really see not just the artistry or what it is in the story, but the meaning and the concepts and the things behind it. You always have to see that when it comes to, it's consuming your entertainment. Hopefully you can see that, what the artist was trying to get across, the themes. And then your difference, my story, the Cursed Detective, the Pages of the Pentacle, is the difference. So I have to be able to create something different, but show that at least I understand the concepts from those stories that I was inspired by. That's kind of that's what I got from the Avant-Guarde Gambit. That was first part of inspiration. So that's my reference. I want to sit down and basically go through and think and write out my deference, because that's the second step. And hopefully I can write about that randomly soon, and that'll be part of the next podcast up. The other inspirational aside I got randomly from listening to another podcast. Actually, I was watching this on YouTube. One of my favorite shows of all time, Portlandia. Fred Armisen and Carrie Brownstein, the creators and actors on the show, are doing a rewatch podcast. I think it's called AO Rewatch or something like that, where they're going through. And again, what drew me to it is they're not just going through and talking about the episodes. They basically are talking about the creative process. And I love that, even though I don't have the best feelings about celebrity podcasts. I don't have the same feeling with this, because I love that show. And it's not just a celebrity podcast. It was like, hey, I'm a celebrity and I know other celebrities. This is more about going in a deep dive of the whole creative process, which I'm loving and really listening to, watching and listening to. They're only a couple episodes in, But the last episode, I saw Carrie Brownstein, who's brilliant. They were talking, her and Fred were talking about them being really novice on creating a show from that perspective. And they thought they had to do a lot more, but they were working with great directors and editors and all that stuff. We're kind of showing them that, a scene doesn't have to be this long. You don't have to show certain things. And Carrie made the great point. Enter a scene late and leave early. And I love that. I probably don't 100% understand what it means, but I love it. What I relate it to is when previous in the podcast episodes, I've done this thing called in media res, where I have scenes just in the middle of a story. You as the viewer are just thrown into a story. You enter the scene late and you leave early. You don't get the full story. You get the cusp of that story, and that's all you really need as a viewer. You don't need everything. You don't need to see how they got there, what path they took and all that stuff, what route they drove down. You got the vision of them getting there and the story being told from that point. So that's something to keep in mind as far as the story creative process goes. That's my other inspirational aside. And also, as another thing for this episode, that's like the process, the story creative process. Since the last episode, I talked more about the cursed detective and the background of my main character. In that, I needed to create more of the villain in that cursed detective story. And just happenstance, I was listening to a true crime podcast. They were talking about conspiracies, and this was a conspiracy I've never heard of. And it blew my mind, and it threw me down such a rabbit hole. And again, I have to go buy more books about this. It's like an older book, but the conspiracy theory about the son of Sam, David Berkowitz. I always heard about that. I know there was a movie, Summer of Sam, by Spike Lee, but I've never heard the true life conspiracy theory that David Berkowitz wasn't the only killer in the Son of Sam. Like, so that rabbit hole goes down that it was a whole cult. It was multiple people. It was a whole conspiracy theory about cults connected to the Manson family in California. All this stuff it's a deep rabbit hole full of conspiracies that probably never be proven. But there's this amazing book. There's an amazing journalist and writer called Maury Terry, who kind of started this and wrote this book called The Ultimate Evil. Another book I've been shopping for. I'll probably order on thrift books. It's an older book, then they rebought it back out because there was a Netflix documentary a couple years ago that I haven't seen, but I probably need to watch. That's based on this. And of course, there was a podcast series based on it that I listened to also, going to all the theories. And it basically, my mouth was agape just listening. I was like, I never heard this, but I love conspiracy theories, especially with this, because David Berkowitz is still alive, and with a lot of interviews with the writer Maury Terry, he kind of confessed to a lot of things that I think the Son of Sam killings were a bunch. I mean, there were a lot. There were 7 or 8, and there were a bunch of fires and arson and stuff. But David Berkowitz later on has only said that he was responsible for 2 or 3 of them, and that the rest were what they call the Sons of Sam. And there's all these things with the letters that were written, and it's a deep dive. But the whole conspiracy with this cult aspect called the Sons of Sam and all this stuff within how it happened, where the neighborhood in Yonkers in New York and all that stuff. That's what I'm saying. I'm taking from the inspiration I'm taking from to create my kind of in the Cursed Detective story, the cult group that I'm using. That's kind of opposite to Aska Strickland's what I named him in the Cursed Detective. Because like I said, in the last episode, Aska has this meeting with the leader of the group, and he exposes that he's this cult, and he exposes that his whole theory is that everyone here is a devil, and that he's just trying to make everybody else see that people who are, very famous and very big and all that stuff, they're truly devils. So he puts them in these situations where he does, all this crazy stuff to make them expose themselves as devils. That's his overall villain arc and theme. So I wanted to create more about the cult that kind of he controls, and I'm going to use this Sons of Sam as cult theory and conspiracy theory as like my basis for the villain group in the Cursed Detective story that the writer has written and is kind of ending and all that stuff, because all three of these stories are going to be happening at the same time. Like you have the real time story with the writer and him basically struggling with ending this Cursed Detective story, and the Pages role playing group, and also the Cursed Detective story that he's written in past stories. They're all going to kind of relate at the same time as the story going to be told in threes. That's how I'm building it out. But yeah, those are my inspirations. The Avant-Guarde Gambit, the Sons of Sam for the cult group. And here's a teaser for the next. So the next story I want to write, like I did the previous one, the anxiety told in threes. The next one is going to be, the name of it is going to be The Dead Man's Papers. And that's going to be like, that's a story from the Cursed Detective series. And that's going to kind of expound into the real life story of the Pages role playing group and the writer's story. So it's going to be called The Dead Man's Story. It's like one of those title cards for the Cursed Detective old detective stories. And you're going to see it kind of be brought to real life in the writer and the Pages role playing group, The Dead Man's Story. So that's the next one. I've got a good concept of it. I just need to essentially write it in threes. It's going to be that way. I've mostly got it, but I'm rambling on. It's really hot. I don't have the AC. I don't have a fan on. We're still in summer. It's so hot. I have nothing on. I'm sweating right now. I sweat for my craft. But thank you so much for listening. I'm going to end it there. This is Dumb Test Late. I'm still Kirk. It's the Story Creative Podcast. Thank you so much for going down these creative rabbit holes and deep dives with me. Hopefully be back soon. I want to get on a better schedule for recording. Thank you again. Be nice to each other. Be happy. Do something nice for yourself. Buy flowers for yourself one day. Donate something. Give something away. Smile. Accept one another. Accept yourself. Love everyone. What else? Drink water. Stretch. Hydrate. Be nice. Be nice. Be nice. Bye-bye.